Once upon a time, when fish and chips was a cheap meal, when the human brain could remember phone numbers. Back in those days, there was this really strange custom. And it happened about this time of the year, but people would give each other these little books. Like, they didn't really have pages in them. They had a little cardboard cover to them, thin cardboard, and like a picture on the outside. And what you could do on the inside, it's hard to believe, but you could send a private message to the person that you're giving this to, and you could write it by hand. People used things called pens. And they gave these little tiny books to each other at this time of the year, and they called them Christmas cards. And they've almost become a rare commodity. That I think one day Christmas cards will be like a collector's item, like stamps, and they'll be really valuable Christmas cards. And as a kid, my mum and dad pastored churches, and like this Christmas, Cora and I already have received some Christmas cards, which was really special. I'd forgotten what they looked like. But as a kid, we would get so many, we'd stick them all across the mantelpiece, and then we'd string from one side of the mantelpiece to the other and hang more on, and we'd hang more beneath that. And you'd get so many that you get 2 or 3 of the same one. On the outside, the messages, the PMs you got were different, right? But anyway, these cards, I noticed over time that some of them had the same words. They might have had different pictures, but they had the same words. And they had these words on them: peace on earth. Now, I think we've got one that is going to pop up on the screen in a moment. That's the sort of thing. That's a more modern one. The ones I remember had, like wise men and stars and stuff like that. But it was peace on earth. And that was a quote that comes out of Luke chapter 2. And it was part of when the kids were doing their little thing this morning. And it's the story of when those outback stockmen were looking after the sheep, and they're camped out with the sheep, and the angels appear and they make these big, bold statements and they sing these songs, and it's a quote from that. Now, Christmas cards were first commercially produced back in England in about the 1840s. And when they started putting Bible verses on them, the only Bible they had to choose from was the King James Bible, this old-fashioned, old way of speaking Bible. Now, that King James Bible, this is how it says it: "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill towards men." Have you ever noticed around this Christmas time how we use very emotive words like joy and peace and all those words, right? But we talk about love and family, and they feel really warm and fuzzy words, don't they? And last Tuesday, I took my 8-year-old granddaughter, and we're heading over to near Maffra to buy a couple of ferrets. And on the way over, Brooklyn says to me, that doesn't feel much like Christmas yet, Granddad. And I said, well, what does Christmas feel like? And she thought for a moment. She goes, it's like you're expecting something. You're sort of looking forward to this thing. I said, well, we'll get there. You'll get there. Christmas is a feeling, isn't it? Like, that's how she is trying to describe it. It's a feeling. And we use this word peace at Christmas time, and it has a feeling to it. And it's what the angels declared that would be experienced on earth because of the arrival of Jesus. Now, If that peace is between nations, if I get this around the right way, Coral, I handle it like that. If it's between nations, this peace that the angels sung about, in the last 100 years, just World War I, World War II together, 80 million people were killed. And then we've had more wars since. So if that's what they're singing about, that peace between nations, it's been a failure. It has not worked. And what the angels are singing about has not come on earth. In fact, it's a failure. Just hasn't been what was said. So, wonder what it could be. Because when it comes to nations and the wars between nations, Jesus actually said that is going to be a sign that as those things increase, it's getting closer to the end of this world as we know it. And he actually said in the same book, same writer in Luke, he says, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. And he adds, not just about wars, there's going to be uprisings, there's going to be rebellions, there's going to be threats of war, reports of war, rumours of war. And one of the translations says, news of battles far away. Now, in this last 100 years, where so many, we can't even comprehend the lives that have been lost, there's been a focus in our social media and on the news about war. And there's been protests in the streets of Melbourne about war, about climate change. But so you can't stop something that God has said is coming. And our world has this focus on war and reports on war, like the Middle East now, but in the Ukraine and 2 years ago, nearly, when Russia invaded the Ukraine, that war's been going for 10 years, but that's been a lot of focus of our world on war. But Jesus said, this is what he said, do not be frightened. These things must happen first, but then the end will come, but not straight away. He talked about the birth pangs that Heather was mentioning, of something that's going to come out of all this pain. And the end that Jesus talks about is him returning and renovating and rebuilding and restoring this world. If he made this world in the first place, he can build a new one, better, with God with us. And where he says he's going to wipe away every tear. There'll be no more pain, no more sickness, no more death. That world is coming. So if it's not peace between nations, is it peace between... Is it peace between us and us? Is that... Have I spelled it? Oh, Coral. Is that better? Yes. Is it peace between individuals? See, Jesus did also say that God blesses those who work for peace, for they will be called the children of God. So if it's peace between us and us, here's the problem. Same book of Luke, old mate Luke, he grabs his little iPhone and he records a conversation that Jesus is having about this sort of peace. And he describes how individuals won't just fight over football teams. They're going to be divided over him. And in this video that Luke records, he records these words of Jesus. This is what Jesus says. Do you think I came to bring peace on earth? No. I've not ever seen that on a Christmas card. We cherry pick stuff sometimes, doesn't he? But Jesus says no, because what's going to happen is how people respond to me is actually going to at times cause division between people. You may have already known that in your own family. And there are countries overseas where in different religions, people do terrible things to their own family. If they have a teenage daughter or a teenage son that wants to follow Jesus, they will do terrible things and it's legal. Or the consequences, the punishment's very minimal. And so Jesus is saying, I didn't come to fundamentally bring peace between individuals. So that sort of peace is not it. Good job? In one hit, hey? So could it be... Have I spelled that one right? Yep. Could it be peace of mind? In the last financial year, our beloved Victorian government has spent $3.8 billion trying to help issues with mental health. And they haven't done it because Daniel Andrews was this warm, caring, generous, soft-hearted leader. It was because the need is so powerful, the need is so strong that you can't ignore it even as a government. So you've got to try to do something. But in reality, mental health issues and anxieties is increased. It hasn't decreased. It hasn't been peace of mind to all people on earth. And so it hasn't worked. You're getting used to that, aren't you, Kath?
Are you enjoying it?
I am enjoying that, yes. I am having fun with that. So we're sort of starting to run out of things that it could be peace between. Now, just to be clear, the peace that was declared would come to earth is for now. It's peace on earth now. It's not one day when you die. It's to be experienced here and now. Now, the first three pieces that we popped the little balloon on, every one of them, at best, are only temporary. See, at the end of World War I was spoken about as the war to end wars. And there was peace for about 20 years and then World War II. You can't have peace between nations permanently. It is at best only temporary. If you have peace between individuals, at some point, people get at war with each other. There's hostilities, and sometimes those hostilities are permanent. And if you have peace of mind now, if enough bad stuff happens in your world, you can lose that peace. And the peace that most people chase is peace between individuals and peace of mind. But we know instinctively that it's temporary. I've noticed on Facebook, if someone has someone in their world that's important to them and they die, and as people try to support them in their grief, they will often say something like this. They'll write these words, rest in peace, about the person that's died. Where does that come from? It's not from the Bible. Where does this thought that when they die, they will rest in peace? Where does that come from? See, when the angels declared peace on earth, it was now. It was now. And it was permanent. And it wasn't temporary. And it wasn't one day when you die you'll get this. It's for now. In fact, you can only experience this now. And if you experience it now, you get to take it with you. Now, at the start I mentioned about the King James Version of the Bible. And when they first started to produce that, who can tell me what year it was, just roughly? Did I see the hand, Kate? Put your hand up. Have a guess. Any number, pick a number.
1.
Well done, number 1. That's the start. There's a 1 and a 6 and 2 more ones. So you did very well. So 1611, this King James Bible was first produced. And they were taking something that was in a Greek language and trying to put it into this funny old English language. And there's a few little places they didn't quite right. They didn't have all the technology, all the computers. In fact, in the 1800s, the late 1800s, they found all this Greek manuscripts of things that were contemporary from 2,000 years ago, and they can now understand and translate so much better. But the King James Bible, unfortunately, it got it wrong in the message that the angels declared. And the problem with that, it's gone on Christmas cards and it's got in our culture and we believe it, but it's not true. See, the King James says, peace on earth, goodwill to men. But the correct way it should be said is, and on earth, peace to men on whom his favour rests. And that peace is conditional. It's the peace that rests, the peace that we can experience because God's favour rests upon us. And not everyone will experience that. What the King James Bible accidentally gave the impression of, that this peace would be to everyone on earth. And it isn't. It's conditional. Because this peace is between us and God. And not everyone will experience that because not everyone wants to. See, in this room and those online, there's only really 2 types of people, two distinct groups of people in here, anywhere. It's those who've made peace with God and those who haven't. That's the difference. And Anne-Marie gave me permission to share this little part of a story. But a little while back, Anne-Marie and Jason came in here for the very first time. Never been part of a church. And in the baby steps that followed, Anne-Marie got to a place where she believed in Jesus, and we baptised both of you in that little pool out there, right? But there were still real big struggles going on in their lives. And one day we're sitting down the front here in the afternoon and praying with Anne-Marie, and I can remember saying to her, have you ever really, really surrendered your life to Jesus? And she says, no. She says, I've been at war with him my whole life. And she held things against God that had happened when she was young and all the different things that happens in life. And there was a war going on. And she got to a place that day where she admitted and she waved the white flag and she surrendered. And she prayed this prayer, and I didn't lead her in it. She prayed it from her heart. And I'm telling you, if you could have been in here and heard that prayer, it was one of the most precious prayers I've ever heard in my life. Because she was inviting Jesus to come in and to lead her and guide her and to put her trust in him and not all her own resources. And most people would not admit they're at war with God. We will maybe say we get a bit angry at God sometimes. Sometimes people will admit that they're disappointed with God. You can be even critical with how God does things, but you wouldn't describe yourself as being at war with God. But see, the Bible does. And most Aussies, if you ask them, do you believe in God? Most Aussies will say yes. But it's the wrong question. The right question, the better question is, do you believe in the God of the Bible? Because what happens is, in our minds, we imagine, we create a God that we are comfortable with. And the God that, if we imagine the God that we want to make up in our heads, we'll not be at war with that God. But we will be at war with the God of the Bible. Because his standards are too high. His holiness, it's too hard. See, just the boundaries that God puts around our sexuality, our gender, for our culture, that's too restrictive. And the consequences of this God of the Bible, if we just be independent, declared independence from him and want to do stuff our own way, the consequences he describes, that doesn't seem right. And so it's so easy to be at war with that part of God, but then his mercy's too extravagant. It's too easy, it's too simple. It's almost too hard to believe that God would just forgive you. That's got to be wrong. And then it's even worse. He then expects people that step into this relationship with him to treat other people with mercy too. In Colossians chapter 1, Paul, who's describing every single one of us, he says this: once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds. God wasn't our enemy. We thought he was. God didn't see us as enemies. We thought that God was our enemy. Another translation says, and he puts it this way, once you were estranged and hostile. When say a marriage relationship breaks up and hostility is just sitting there, the things that were once strengths to the other person you just see as weaknesses and flaws. And people become very critical of the other person, because when you're at war with someone, when there's no peace, all you'll see is the problems. You'll see the bad stuff, and it'll justify your hostility. We do that with God. When we are not at peace with God, we criticise, we condemn, we justify our own ways. Sometimes that resistance can be subtle. We just dig our little heels in. We don't fight. We just resist. And I've watched over the years young people whose parents come to church and they're sitting in church, but they're really at war with God. It's not a big open declaration, but they don't really want to be here. And I feel for them, because I was them. And then I was 16. I made peace with God. And then when I was 20, I made peace with my dad because I'd been at war with him. And when this peace gets in here between us and God, ran the other way, us and God. When that comes, we're then able to have peace with others. Paul says, as much as it's up to you, live at peace with one another. It means that you can't always, as much as it's possible, he says, but we can as much as it's up to us. And that's the fruit of this peace. I just love it. When we make peace with God, he puts a soft heart in us. He exchanges this hard heart for a soft heart. He puts his Spirit in us. He heals us and he sets us free. And that, I think, was worth singing about 2,000 years ago, with this great big mob of angels declaring peace on earth that we can all experience permanently. It can't be taken away. Let's pray. God, I thank you that you're a God that wants to bring peace on earth between us and you. And it's permanent. It's not temporary. We can experience it in full. And I thank you for that. I thank you for the power that is in our life when that happens. I just want to read a couple of lines from one verse. And this is what happens when we wave the white flag, when we surrender and the war is over between us and God. This is how God sees us. And this is Colossians 1:22. It says, we are holy in God's sight, without blemish, without faults, and free from any accusation. That's a pretty amazing way to live, having that sense of peace between you and God. In about 4 or 5 days' time, Mary and I'm going to be visiting your little clinic, because every year I get a skin cancer test done. And I don't care when it happens, just, about once a year I'll get this thing done. But this year at our church camp, I could feel this thing on my ear. And I was sore. I thought, I don't like that. So suddenly I decided that I wanted to bring my appointment at the skin cancer clinic forward. Suddenly I'm very keen and I want to know when it is, and I got it as forward as much as I could, went in there, they did a little biopsy, and yep, in a few days' time they're going to whack off half my ear and take this thing away, right? I'm going to look like someone who had a bout with Mike Tyson or something. How much do they take off? Much? All of it. Going to lose the whole ear. I was feeling at peace. See what happens when your peace can go, that sort of peace, right? But see, if I didn't know that I had a problem, I wouldn't be concerned and be looking for a solution. And if you ignore or don't know that you need peace with God, you'll not search for it. You'll not be hungry for it. But if you are aware, I would really encourage you this Christmas, as simple as it is in your own way, have a chat to God and make peace with him. It's a very, very precious thing. And 1 billion years from now, it'll just be as precious. It never loses its value, that peace with God. Thanks, God.